Alright, so where we left off, we had said that at an angle of 3 pi over 2, that the point had a height of 1 feet. Now we said that because this distance is 3 feet, and the distance up to that center is 4 feet. So 4 minus 3 is 1. Next, we're going to get up to this point right here. Now this point would be 2 pi, an angle of 2 pi, because we've done a full spin around the circle. At 2 pi, we are back up to a height of 4 feet. So 2 pi, about 6.28, we're back up to height of 4 feet. So connecting these points, we have a sinusoidal graph. And of course, we continue on in both directions. Alright, so what I'd like to point out to you is this. Sinusoidal graphs have what's called a midline. And this midline is a horizontal line that essentially cuts the graph in half, to a top half and a bottom half. It's basically the top half is essentially a reflection of the bottom half, just shifted over a little bit. Also point out that from this midline, the distance between the top of the graph and the midline is 3 units. And the distance between the midline and the bottom of the graph is 3 units. And this 3 units, this 3 here, is our amplitude for the graph. And this midline has something to do with the fact that the entire wheel has a center that was raised up 4 units above the ground. So you can think of this 4 as being a vertical shift of the wheel, causing a vertical shift of our graph. Alright. So the center value of a sinusoidal function is the midline. And it is the value above which and below which the graph oscillates. So this right here was our midline for the wheel problem up here. It corresponds to a vertical shift. You can see that it shifted our regular sine graph up 4 units, just like this wheel was shifted up 4 units above the ground. So if we have a function like f of theta equals cosine of theta plus k, then the line y equals k will be our midline. For this example, the midline was y equals 4. So if you see a cosine graph or a sine graph, where you've just got cosine theta plus k or sine theta plus k, then the horizontal line y equals k will be the midline. Next up, period of the function. Just a reminder, the period of the function is the value at which the sinusoidal function will repeat its cycle. And if you have a function rule in the format of sine of a number b times theta, then you use the formula 2 pi divided by b to determine what the length of the period is. So in these 3 examples down here, we need to find the amplitude, the midline, and the period. So for the amplitude is always the coefficient in front of the sine or in front of the cosine. Amplitude, I'll also note, is the absolute value of that number a. I don't think I mentioned that up above here. Let me check it out. Nope. I want to make a note that the amplitude is the absolute value of that number a right there. So the absolute value of -3 is 3, and so the amplitude here is 3, and the amplitude of 1/2 is 1/2. So that function would have an amplitude of 1/2. Now a basic sine or cosine function has an amplitude of 1, and so this, having amplitude of 1/2, is going to basically make it a sort of vertical shrink, whereas this one, amplitude of 3, will be a vertical stretch. This negative symbol is also going to happen to flip it, so it's a reflection. But we haven't addressed those yet. Next up, the midline. The midline, you can see, is this. We get that from our plus k at the end. So here, our midline will be y equals 2. So this would be a vertical shift of up 2 units. This one here, it's got a -3 at the end. So this midline is going to drop down to -3. So that would be a translation down 3 units. Last, the period, how long it takes the function to repeat. For this one, we take our b, which is pi over 3, and we do 2 pi over b. So we'll keep the first change, divide to multiply, the reciprocal of the second number, and then you multiply. That would be a period of 12. For this one, our b is 1/3. We do 2 pi over b. Keep, change, flip. That would be 2 pi times 3, 6 pi over 1, or 6 pi. Last up, we've got a graph and we need to write a function for it. Let's start out with y equals. Now one thing that I notice is that this graph, well, let me back up a second. First thing that I think it's helpful to do is identify where the midline of the graph is. See that it goes down to a minimum value of 1 and a maximum value of 7. So the midline then would be y equals 4, because that's halfway between 1 and 7. So I know that at the end of my function, I'm going to have a plus 4 tacked on to the end. Kind of like I had a, had a plus 2 tacked on here, and a minus 3 tacked on there. Alright, next thing, the amplitude. Let's go back to this. Amplitude. See that from my midline up to the top of the graph is 3 units, and down to the bottom of the graph is distance of 3 units, negative 3 units if you want to go from here to there. But either way, amplitude is going to be 3. That's going to be the coefficient. Next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to look and see that when the angle is 0, my graph starts out at the midline. Now, notice that with a sine graph, the graph, when the angle is 0, starts out at the midline. For cosine graph, it starts out above the midline, and only later it drops down to this midline here. So since it starts out at the midline, I'm going to say that this is a sine graph. It's going to be sine of a number times theta. So ask, what is the period of the graph? How long does it take to repeat? Alright, so I see that from midline, back past the midline, now even though it's crossing the midline again, this doesn't complete a cycle because it still has to do the below phase of the oscillation. Once we get to here, now we can see that it's completed a full cycle. So it takes 10 units to complete the full cycle. So know that the period is going to be 10. But I want to know what my B is. Because remember, we use B to find the period. So use the formula 2 pi over B, and that equals the period. Now we decided that the period was 10, so I'm going to set 2 pi over B equal to 10. So multiply both sides by B, and then divide both sides by 10. That's going to get us 2 pi over 10, which simplifies down to pi over 5. And so my B is pi over 5. And that's what I have for you today. So we'll see you in class.